Deltarune fans are obsessed with the freedom motive. Ever since they found out two similar tunes in both Jevil and Spamtom's themes, they began to theorize about a freedom motive, and assured that the secret bosses of future chapters would be tied to this freedom motive somehow. And guess what? In the end, they were right. Almost. But what is this freedom all about exactly? It seems like a silly question, I know, and that's precisely what we're going to be talking about today. How this so-called freedom motive refers to being free of fear, and how the shadow crystals and beings made of darkness are related to fear. And so, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Before the Lightner's arrival to the Card Kingdom, Jevil was the king's court jester, along with Sin, the cat, who was a magician. Until one day, according to him, Jevil met a certain someone who made him lose his mind. He started spewing nonsense and treating everything like a game. Because of this, they had to seal him in the dungeon, breaking the key in 3 parts until the Lightners arrived to face the Dark Jester. And as you know, Jevil's boss fight is one of the toughest, and I don't think this is just a gameplay decision. I believe that the complexity of some bosses gives us a good idea of how powerful they are in world. I think that it's safe to assume that that certain someone who drove Jevil mad granted him a lot of power. That makes us wonder if he was really contained or he just let himself be trapped. Zim also mentions that there were some splashes of lucidity in between his ramblings. It could be that the certain someone made Jevil realize he wasn't real, that he was nothing but a card in a deck, and this world was nothing but a fantasy. That also may explain his philosophy, the reason why he thinks everyone is trapped and he is the only one free. If everyone he knows is a chess piece in a game created by whoever manifested the Dark Fountains, and if their destiny is written in prophecy, and nothing has a meaning, then why not have fun? That another hand showed him the truth of his world, and if his fate is already written, does it mean that he's free to do anything? If the end of this tale can't be changed, does it mean that he's free to do anything as he pleases without consequences? His ending will be the same no matter what. Besides, he knows part of the prophecy or knows something about the future, since once defeated, he warns the party about the Queen and the Knight. And since we're talking about him, the Knight's hand is obvious of what it refers to, but are we sure that the Queen he talks about is the Queen of the Cyber World and not the Queen of Monsterkin? But that's a theory for another day. The point I'm trying to get across is how the shadow crystals represent phobias or preying phobias, and I think the fear that embodies him perfectly is erasophobia, the fear of living in a simulation. By the way, not all of the phobias I found have fancy names, but I found some that fit pretty well with the characters we'll be looking into. But what greater burden could a jester carry than knowing that this whole act, that all of his work has no purpose? That's precisely what the other him showed him, and the fear that the shadow crystals helps him overcome. He forgets that this whole world is fake by being insane. The crystal brings power to the holders, frees them of their fears, but at the same time, feeds off their anguish and despair. And the only way the crystal gave Jevil to be free is by ignoring their reality completely. But anyways, on to the next boss. Spamtom is a Darkner from the cyber world. His real-world counterpart is a bit ambiguous. He's just a spam male, but he might as well be the trash can in the library. He used to be just like the Addisons, the other cyber world vendors. The only thing that makes him different is he wasn't lucky. We find this out if we go to the dumpster after defeating Neo. But one day, he received a mysterious code that gave him all he ever wished for, abandoning the Addisons since neither he or them needed the other anymore. But just as all that fame and success came, it disappeared out of nowhere. That mysterious someone cut communication with him and got evicted from the Queen's mansion. And according to the Blue Addison, the only thing he left was a phone with garbage noise at the other end, as he just left in the middle of a call. But what was helping him exactly? They mentioned that he was always on the phone after he became successful. What's more, one of the Queen's guards says he didn't use his room much either, that he spent his time in the basement, praying to the darkness. It's right there where we found the Neo suit. In Switch's words after Neo is defeated, he mentions that robot was a drawing created by a Lightner, that being Mettaton in his ghost form back in hometown obviously, but he simply gave up and abandoned the project, leaving it to rot like the rest of the corrupted data. This is just one more similarity between Deltarune and Undertale, of course, but this also means that the influence of some Dark Worlds goes beyond their fountains. The Card Kingdom was isolated and self-contained in the school's closet, but since the cyber world is, well, the internet, that plays a bit more with the fact that some Darkness have already met some characters from the light world. Spamtom knew who Noel and Chris were, and he's one of the only Darkness that refers to Chris by his name. But how did Spamtom become obsessed with the suit? And how did the Shadow Crystal get there in the first place? It's very likely it was the same person that drove Jevil insane, gave him the crystal, and was helping Spamtom over the phone. But in Spamtom's case, the crystal showed him a way out. Jevil had his worldview completely changed and saw that he was not real, but Spamtom was already aware of the light world from the start, just like the rest of Darkness in the cyber world. He knows he's meant to be a salesman. Could we say that what he really saw in the crystal was a way to avoid being forgotten, a way to achieve what he so desperately desired, a way to be a big shot? For what I could gather, and yes, I'm running out of fancy phobias, Spamtom's fear was coinophobia, the fear of not being successful or the fear of being mediocre. The crystal preyed on that fear, on that insecurity, and made him obsessed with the suit, thinking that it would give him all the power he craved, the ability to be successful, to be great. Although maybe not in the way he expected, since when he obtains the suit, he becomes more of a puppet. And this puppet analogy is not as literal as we think. I think it refers to Spamtom being a salesman, so when that someone gave him all the good sales pitch, he became a puppet controlled by one string, that string being the cable of the phone, doing exactly what someone else says. That's why he's so horrified to see the strings and wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. He thought that by getting rid of the strings, he'd finally have an idea of his own, but that wasn't the case. Without those strings, he was nothing. That's why, and I insist, the so-called freedom motives refers to freeing oneself from fear. The crystals gave these Darkness a way to overcome their fears by any means but by facing them. Anyways, let's get to the next crystal, although this particular fear does not belong to a boss per se. After meeting Tenna in the Primetime Dark World, we can meet Ramb too. He's unlike the rest of Darkness from this chapter, since he doesn't belong to Chris's living room. He's a Darkner from the cyber world, most likely an outlet that Asriel took from the library. That's why he feels so out of place, and other Darkners from Tenna's show ostracize him. But where am I getting with this? As you know, the Shadow Crystal of this chapter is given by the Roaring Knight after defeating him wearing the Shadow Mantle, and it's not like we really defeat him. Susie breaks a shard from his sword, and then, most likely, Chris knocks down the rest of the party. But ignoring that, I do think that Shadow Crystal was meant for someone. Maybe it was meant for Ramb. We know that Chris and the Knight are working together to a certain degree. After all, he left the door open for him to enter. And seeing the position that Ramb was, a good chunk of the community theorizes that the Shadow Crystal was meant for him, and the crystal could have preyed on his fear to disappear, of being an outcast, of being lonely. Autophobia, maybe. And in an attempt to not disappear, he would have wanted to take Tenna's spot. After all, he wanted to be loved. But the Knight did not expect that it was for Ramb's will to be that strong. Since he was an external agent to the Primetime Dark World, he wasn't bound by the show rules, and did not have the same mentality as the other Darkners, and so, all he wished was to help Chris. He knew that Tenna was messing with the game, and so let Chris play the true version of the Legend of Zelda knockoff that allows him to overcome his fear. And yeah, the friend is also there, staring at us. But just as some people theorize that Ramb helps Chris to free himself from Tenna, maybe these two share the same fear. The fear of being an outcast, of being alone. And that's precisely what Aram represents, in a way. Although Aram, the tree, and the Tail of Hell deserve a whole video themselves, but anyways, let's get to the last secret boss. Gerson is a Darkner from the Sanctuary, taking the form of the historian and later writer Gerson Boom. His light form are his remains encased with his hammer in his son's study. When we find him the first time, he's pretty much an idealized version of Gerson in his later years, who was also a paladin from one of his books. The thing is, Gerson is not corrupted by a shadow crystal. In fact, he gives it to the party after Susie beats him for the axe. The fear motive can be heard during his fight, but what the knight didn't take into consideration was that Gerson had no fear to prey upon. That's why his freedom motive is barely present. He isn't having a moment of euphoria during his fight, neither is he desperately trying to reach out to us. He has no fear, and the knight wasn't counting on that. Perhaps he was expecting Gerson to take it and stop the Lightners, thinking that he would be horrified of the idea of being dead. But as I said, Gerson was truly unbound by his fears. He helped Susie to overcome her own fears, her fear of the inevitable, her fear of the prophecy. He was a writer after all, and he knew very well the only one deciding their story are the Lightners. That's why he has no use for the crystal, and the fear of the inevitable, or as the prophecy might suggest, that necrophobia is not present on him neither. Now, do you see one consistent theme among all of these bosses? That's why I said that fear and freedom are important, and the freedom motive refers to being free of fear. Besides, there is an interesting pattern here. Jevil is a dark nerd that didn't know he was part of a fantasy, and upon finding out the truth, he went mad and finds joy in insanity, ignoring the truth and finding a false sense of freedom. Spamtom is a dark nerd that understands his role as one. He is an internet seller and tries to fulfill his role as such, trying to be the best seller, to be the biggest of shots, and he's afraid of failing, of not being useful. Ramb is a dark nerd that's not even from Chris's living room, but he saw him opening the Dark Fountain and has a close connection to him. He understands his role as an outlet, as a tool, and tries to help Chris to overcome his fear not by playing Tena's game, but by beating the errant secret boss that is somehow related to some deeper issues with Chris and his past. Maybe something to do with his fear of being left out, since he's not part of Monster King. And at last there is Gerson, a dark nerd that takes most of the essence of someone who was a Lightner. Since he's passed away, he has no fear to prey upon, and this allows him to help Susie to overcome his own dilemma and free herself from the fear of the prophecy. As more and more chapters come out, the relationship of the secret bosses between the light world and the dark world is getting thinner and thinner. It's starting with Jevil being a full-fledged dark nerd, and currently we have a dark nerd based on the remains of someone who was alive. And we do know who the next crystal bearer is going to be. The flower man of the asylum, Asgore Dreamer. He is a Lightner, the father of Chris Dreamer. He is afraid of losing his family, and tries to do his best to not lose their love. We do not know exactly what he did or why he was kicked out of the police, but he is trying to make amends, and we can find him talking to himself, mentioning he has a shadow crystal in his hands, or what he thinks he is just a piece of glass. Maybe that's exactly what the shadow crystal will be preying upon, his fear of losing his family, his fear of not being there for Toriel and Chris, and his guilt over whatever happened with Des, in case he has anything to do with Des, of course. And there is some foreshadowing to this between Toriel and Sans' relationship, as we see it growing closer and closer, feeding Asgore's jealous and resentment. But shadow crystals are not the only thing embodying fears. Ralsei refers to the Titan as the fear of darkness and the bump in the night. And I know, we all have our reasons for not trusting Ralsei now, but this all fits too well to just discard it like that. But there's one last piece we still can't figure it out very well, and that is friend. I think friend is a fear shared by Chris and some other characters, Noelle maybe. An entity that, just like Spamtom, has been haunting them since before the first Dark Fountain. What does friend even represent? If I have to take a guess, I'd say that friend is the fear of being watched. But something has to be watching you to be afraid, right? And if the Titan is the fear of darkness, what if friend is the fear of something else being out there in the dark? What happens when you're in the dark and there is someone else with you, but you're not really sure of what it is? Just like the Dark Forest theory. But just remember what the lyric says. Don't forget, I'm with you in the dark.